it's Rose. Welcome back to the Pink Shelves. If you've never been here before, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about 4 books that I recently purchased from an author signing event near where I live. I had a wonderful time. They had it set up all like a farmer's market, and I walked around. I got myself all dressed up for the occasion, and I got some Starbucks beforehand, and then I got to meet all of these lovely authors. The books that I didn't have the money for at the time, I received the information for so that I could buy them later. And I'm very excited to show you the ones that I did purchase and will be reading. Hopefully, I will read them all in one go, because if not, I will be mad at myself, basically. I just like when I buy books together, it really bugs me if I don't finish them sort of all in a row. I don't necessarily know why. I think it's nice and clean that way. It feels better to me. So without further ado, let's get started on those books. First up, we have the one that I am planning on reading first. Now, it is The Search for Orion, which is by Lita, and I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but you can see it there. This is a sci-fi, and this author has some fantasy books out as well. As you can see, this is a very pretty cover, in my opinion. This really drew me in. It's one of those books that has a really nice smell, so that's exciting because I'm one of those people that loves the smell of books. But it is about Calum and Andromeda, and they are, by the sound of it, enemies, but then they have to team up to do a mission together. And I love sci-fi, and I love a good love story, so hopefully I will find wonderful examples of both of those things in this book. Honestly, if I have to review any of these books negatively, I think it's going to devastate me because all of these authors were such lovely, beautiful people. I would mention that, very excitingly, all of these are signed. None of these are famous books, but they're all signed, and that's so cool to me. I love that they're signed, and I love how personal that feels already, and then also having had like meaningful conversations with these writers. Oh, it's so wonderful. The next book that we have is called Once Upon a Rose. It is a cozy retelling of Snow White. This author has 2 other books. It's, I think, Once Upon a Rose and then Once Upon a Pumpkin. This is Once Upon an Apple. And Once Upon a Rose, I believe, is Sleeping Beauty, and Once Upon a Pumpkin is Cinderella. The books are all somewhat standalone, so I was tempted to buy the Once Upon a Rose simply because the cover is all pink. And my name is Rose, so I'm partial to that whole concept. Obviously, you can also tell, I think, that I like pink. I don't know if you can tell that my makeup is pink, but needless to say, my whole channel brand is sort of pink. But I got this one because I do kind of want to read them in order, and I think that I read the summary of this more closely when I got home. I think this is going to be very cute. I'm very excited. Another one, which is something that I wouldn't usually put myself out there for, but the man that I conversed with and he assisted in writing this book was the sweetest. This book was written by a group called Sisters in Crime, which is a group that was apparently established to help get murder mysteries and mysteries in general that were written by women pushed out into the world, published, read. Because at a certain point, this group of women realized that women were the ones reading most of the mystery novels, but they weren't really being allowed to write them. And if they did, they weren't getting a lot of popularity. So they decided to form this Sisters in Crime. And in the modern day, after so many years, about 10% of this worldwide, by the sound of it, group of people are men as well, and they are called Mr. Sisters. And the man that I conversed with that was selling their books at this book signing event, and there are so many, and they are all art-based crimes. He was a Mr. Sister, and he said that so proudly. I adored interacting with him. I thought he was the best. I thought the whole concept was wonderful. So this book is The Fine Art of Murder. So this is all short. It is an anthology written by multiple people that are in this Sisters in Crime organization, and it is all these short stories that are about murder mysteries to do with fine art. I'm excited to read this. I don't read a lot of mystery. I watch a lot of mystery. I don't read a lot of it. So this is exciting, and I can't wait to read this one either. Last but certainly not least, we have what is actually the first book that I decided to purchase at this signing. I was very selective, but I got to this woman and I saw her whole setup and I talked to her for about 10 minutes. And I just knew, I was like, I have to buy this book because this is such a great conversation we're having. The character art that she had displayed, she had her character art displayed and she had drawn it herself, and it was so beautiful. It was so great. It drew me in immediately, like from, like 10 feet away or something. And so this is called Payton City. It is The Marks of a Thay, book 1. I think the second one is out and the third one is coming out soon. I got the first one. And she put a little note in there for me. That was so exciting. We had such a good conversation. I had good conversations with a lot of people, both people whose books I purchased, and ones that I chose not to purchase. But I loved talking to this woman, and she had the coolest vibe. Her jewelry, her outfit, and her husband was with her, and they were just the sweetest together. And I got to tell her about my book that is releasing in a couple of months, and she seemed very excited about the premise of it, and so we just really got to connect. This book is about a fantasy world, but there is a city in this fantasy world that is stuck in a sort of dystopia because they have been sealed inside of this dome in order to like save themselves from apocalyptic destruction, is the phrase that the summary uses. And apparently something happens to disrupt that. This is the one I'm looking the most forward to. And just like with the others, I will be devastated if it's a letdown. So that is what I will be reading for the foreseeable future. And I'm excited. So in the rest of this video, perhaps I will be talking about those. Today I did finish The Search for Orion by Lita Dieterlen, and I did look up how to pronounce that name. If I still managed to get it wrong despite checking 3 different reliable sources, I'm terribly sorry. I did finish it, so I will be moving on to the next book on my list. However, first, allow me to review The Search for Orion. The Search for Orion is marketed, both in its synopsis and in the marketing done for the book, as an enemies to lovers sort of sci-fi fantasy. Unfortunately, I did not really get the enemies to lovers part. And the reason why I say unfortunately is not necessarily because I particularly care for enemies to lovers, because I actually don't. I don't prefer enemies to lovers. But because I find it unfortunate that it's marketed as something that it isn't. The characters are never really enemies. Their families are enemies, but the two of them get along from the get-go. They have like one argument, I think, in the entire book, maybe 2, but one of them is really small, so I don't even know if I should count it, honestly, because they apologize immediately after. So at no point were they enemies. At no point were they reluctant to work together or be in the same proximity. They were pretty much just attracted to each other and excited to see each other the whole time. And yeah, I don't even think that the characters were pretending that they were enemies. Like, maybe this is a fault more of the marketing, than of the writer. I'm not sure. But unfortunately, that aspect was just simply not there. Another complaint that I had was just really that it was so full of tropes. It was very only one bed and forced proximity and just very predictable what was going to happen. Like, oh, well, the ship is about to hit something and she's going to fall into his lap. I can tell that that's about to happen because every other fan fiction or romantasy trope has already happened. Like him having to fight gladiator style for her and her being just so distraught the entire time. And that brings me more to another thing that bothered me, which is that the main character, Andromeda, Andy, her personality continued to change throughout the entire thing. She had no consistency, really, as a character. She started out, like, very kind of hostile towards the Ashirans, which is the people that he's from, his family, and just very ultra independent, not really interested in like romantic relationships. And then as soon as she sees him and like meets this guy that she's attracted to, she becomes like she literally thinks about almost nothing else for the rest of the book. But it's not even just she's this way in the beginning and then is this way for the rest of the story, because arguments could be made for that making sense due to the like sort of traumatic event that happens to her in between those two things. But she continues to change throughout the book. It seems like every couple of chapters she has like kind of a full personality change. Like she goes from a somewhat insecure but pretty competent starship captain to a like anxious teenage girl to a like lovelorn princess to lovesick, can't stop thinking about this boy, using modern slang in her internal monologue and the way she's talking, obsessed with puppy dogs and coffee type of person, to this like anger issues, unsure of herself person, back to the sort of anxious teenage girl, and then back to the somewhat insecure but mostly competent starship captain at the end. Now, there are characters who are multifaceted. There are. But this character was not multifaceted. She was all over the place. There's a big difference because every time she switched from one thing to the other, it would be like she had never been the thing before, even though this book takes place over the course of like, I think, less than a week, maybe a week. The main male character was much more consistent. He had much less viewpoint as well, so that might factor into that. But talking about the inconsistency in the character, I can then talk about the problem that I had with the way the book was written. And I promise I have positive things to say about this book as well. I'm getting all of the negative out of the way so I can leave it with the positive. Pretty much the main problem I had with it was that the characters were constantly talking in modern slang. I mentioned that a minute ago, that the main character in particular is guilty of this, but it happens with all of the characters. And it's interesting because I just, in the order of the video, just reviewed Daughter of Siren Queen and had kind of the same complaint of modern, like, vernacular being used in a book that is allegedly fantasy. This book, I'm not really sure if it's supposed to take place in, like, another galaxy or if it's, like, several hundred years from ours. I wasn't clear on that. No problem with me not being clear on that, by the way. I'm usually not really sure when I read sci-fi which one it is, but it just is supposed to be a sci-fi. It's marketed as a sci-fi fantasy, and I get bugged when modern day vernacular, like low-key or like just in general, like Gen Z slang was being used throughout this book. There was some millennial slang as well, and it's like, whether or not, whichever one it is, that doesn't make sense, because if it's the same galaxy and it's hundreds of years later or whatever, thousands maybe, then English would have evolved. People might not even be speaking English anymore. Now, of course, suspension of belief, maybe they are, for the sake of your English readers who are reading the story. But they're probably not going to be using English the same way at all, I don't think. And I seriously doubt that they would be using it on a planet that is very clearly not even meant to be Earth. In fact, it's not even a planet, it's a space station, which was very cool, and I'll get to that in the good parts portion. But the other option, which is that it's a completely other galaxy, makes that even less likely, because there's no way that modern Earth English has had any sway on this complete other fantastical galaxy. I don't know which one this book was, but it doesn't make sense either way for her to say things like low key or other pieces of our modern internet type vernacular. It doesn't. And it also just, even if it did make sense, it really takes me out of any sort of story, unless it is a contemporary fiction or romance that is taking place now. It really takes me out of any story. So I will say that I did still enjoy the book immensely. I really enjoyed reading it. I took my time reading it. Not because I didn't like it, but because I liked so many aspects of it. So I mentioned earlier that the main character hails from a space station where people have been living in kind of a clean, streamlined way after having been driven out of their original planet hundreds of years before. This is really interesting because it gives a really interesting backing to this character, and her only steady motivation is that she views all people in this galaxy as equal and all lives as worth saving and celebrating. And that is a fact that is very well backed up by the fact that, she comes from this place where they welcome refugees, where they were refugees themselves. And that is a really cool part of the book. It has a lot to say about, like, what is necessary for peace, what is necessary for prosperity. She comes from a place where they know the answers to those things, and it shows in how she chooses to use her knowledge to help others as her ancestors were not helped. And that is a theme that is really well held up by the novel. Another thing that I liked about this book was that the characters were all just genuinely good people, aside from the antagonists and villains. Now, I don't mind a character that is not a good person, okay, because that has value in a story, even if they're not technically an antagonist, even if they're a bad person on the right side. That is a very interesting dynamic. What I don't like is a bad person who we are presented with and then expected to accept as a good person. That is something that I cannot stand for. It drives me insane. I have stopped reading books before because that is in there, and I am not one to stop reading a book once I have started it. But you have this cast of characters who, if they are a bad person, they are presented by the narrative as a bad person, and if they are a good person, they are presented by the narrative as a good person. So that is something that I really appreciate about it, that I am not expected to perceive the characters differently than they are. The last thing that I think I really have to say about this book is that although it's very predictable, it's packed full of tropes, and the main character has no consistency, it had the vibe of like the 2009 Star Trek movies, and like the Star Wars prequels. Those are my favorite iterations of sci-fi, I think. And so I had fun reading this book. This book is not going to be for everyone, and not everyone is going to have the same criticisms of it that I do. Maybe there are going to be, people that read it that just point blank don't like it at all, don't have anything good to say about it. There's going to be people that don't have anything bad to say about it. It's all subjective, but personally, I would recommend this book. I will say, if you're interested in knowing this, there is a sort of medium spice level. and it is very obvious and jarring because it's not a book. It's a book that's written like it wouldn't have any spice in it, and then it does have like some occasional implications of very spicy stuff. But nothing too crazy and nothing open door. Now I'll be moving on to the next book on my list, which is Once Upon an Apple. It is about 5 or 6 days later now, and I am reading Once Upon an Apple. According to my reading tracker app, I am about 40% into it. I wanted to try to get halfway today. It is now pretty close to the end of the day, and unless I end up reading before bed, I probably won't get to the exact halfway mark like I originally planned. Between writing and also just feeling genuinely pretty tired today, I had to get some chores done around the house. Yeah, I did not hit my goal, but that is okay because we are authentic on this channel. And I'm authentically telling you that sometimes, most of the time, actually, I do not stay on schedule with my reading habits. This book is really cute. That is the first adjective I can think of to describe it. I want to show, this is an illustration of the front cover in black and white, and then this is the map, because this is a fantasy book. You never see maps anymore, and it ticks me off. I love maps in fantasy books, especially when they're colored. I think the last time that I read a fantasy book with a map in it that had color on it was Land of Stories by Chris Colfer, and I read that in early elementary school. That should not have been allowed. We should not have allowed colored fantasy maps to stop popping up in our fantasy books, and I stand on that. We need to bring it back. I'm very proud of Gabrielle Landy, local author, for beginning to bring back colored fantasy maps. And you know what? Even though I love the color and I think that should come back, I think we should really start by just bringing maps back. I'm a little bit hypocritical to say that because my book that is coming out is technically a fantasy book. It does not have a map in the front, but that is only because the people that I used to publish and format and everything, this book did not really ever offer that as an option. So, in future though, when I have more standing as a writer, I fully intend to put maps in my fantasy books. That was just a little side note. Now I will actually talk about Once Upon an Apple. Like I said, it's really cute. It really is one of those where you can judge it by its cover. Very cute and simple. I think for me personally, I don't enjoy simple as much when I'm reading, but it's still good. That does not make it bad. That makes it not as suited to my personal preferences. I think it's just because a lot of times I do enjoy simple books. Like, I can't remember if I've talked about it here before, honestly, but I enjoyed The Spell Shop. I enjoyed Bridgerton. I've enjoyed several books that were simple for their simplicity, because sometimes I get into a rut of, oh, I've read so many things that were really complex and thought-provoking, and now I need a break. But the last several books I have read have been pretty simple and not very thought-provoking. And so hopefully soon I will get to one that is more thought-provoking. But I respect this book so far for what it is. It is very well written. It was described to me in person by the author herself as a Hallmark movie meets fairy tale retelling. I love fairy tale retellings. I didn't really grow up on Hallmark movies the way that other people do, but I've heard a lot about them and I've seen a couple. I have to say, yeah, the vibes are there. And it's very fall, which is perfect because it's technically fall right now. October, yay. There's a fall festival going on, and the son of the nobleman running, like, in charge of this area is planning the fall festival, because usually his mother, the nobleman's wife, would do it, but she is taking the year off. So he's doing it, and there is a milkmaid who lives in the town where the fall festival is supposed to take place, and she's helping him. They are very cute. I have to say that they had a little bit of insta-love, which is fine, I think, because it's a fairy tale retelling, and it's set in a very fairy tale setting. And it was marketed as a sort of Hallmark vibes thing, I think it's perfectly fine that they have a little bit of insta love. I think that's very on brand. It's not my cup of tea. I'm kind of notorious for really preferring slow burn or at least like medium heat, but it's fine with me that it's like that because of the type of book that it is. The side characters are very well written and fleshed out, which is a thing that is a big pet peeve for me when it does not happen. So that's appreciated. I was fully prepared, especially with it being marketed as a Hallmark type thing, that the side characters would get the treatment that side characters in Hallmark movies often get, where they're so clearly only there as plot devices. But these side characters, they really do seem to exist outside of the main characters while also working to serve the main character's story. It has 7 goats in it instead of 7 dwarves, which is adorable. I adore that. I think it's a cute addition. I think that the main characters are very on brand for the type of thing that they're supposed to make you think of. The main character is very Snow White, not Disney Snow White. I want to make that clear. I'm not comparing any part of this book to Disney Snow White because that's not what it's a retelling of, but very original fairy tale, general Snow White vibes. The main guy is very typical, like, cozy fantasy, romantasy main male character. And when I say romantasy, I'm not talking about the ACOTAR kind. I'm talking more about the cozy kind of romantasy. He's very out of touch with his emotions, is kind of what I mean. Very out of touch with his emotions and very immediately in love with this girl. Not my cup of tea, but I'm enjoying it, and it's all really good for the type of book that it is. I think that fans of this type of genre, fans of cozy fantasy, Hallmark movies, fairy tale retellings, you're gonna like this. Even if you don't, you could give it a try. It's a good one for people who usually read really intense stuff and need a break. Because unlike a lot of stuff that is talked about like that, it's not mind-numbing to the point that it would frustrate you, and it's not badly written. This is a very good book, and it's simple but cute. And I will obviously come back to this with a full review. Hello, it's been 2 days, and I have officially finished Once Upon an Apple. The second half of the book was so much more enjoyable for me than the first one, and that is why I think unless a book is like just blatantly, infuriatingly, and obviously bad, you should really put in an effort to try to finish it before you judge it too harshly. Because I would have rated this book and reviewed this book very differently if I had not read the second half. My official review of this book is that yes, I think that it's pretty slow until you get to like the last little like chunk of it, and it's very like nothing really happens, and the stuff that does happen is not that serious because it's a cozy fantasy. And although there is some like technically serious stuff in the plot, the way that it's handled is kind of akin to the way that a Disney Channel show from our youth might handle a character becoming addicted to caffeine pills or losing a parent. You know, if you can think of the way that like any sort of live action kids show would handle a serious topic, that's kind of how it happens in this book. Now, was this wonderfully prose-ish? Was it like inspired sentence structure? No, but I don't really think that like romance, romantasy, and cozy fantasy, I don't think that any of those 3 genres, which are the 3 genres that this book is listed under, are ever really trying to be that way. And I think that it's okay to just allow a book to be simple. This is a simple book, and that's wonderful. It works wonderful as a simple book. This is also very autumnal. I don't see a lot of autumnal book recommendations that are cozy. I see a lot of them that are like, you know, people recommending things like Twilight, Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre,
Just very like the Emily Wilde books. And I respect that. That is, like the seasonal depression, cloudy skies side of fall. But this was very good as like the pumpkin spice latte, fall festival, costume party, you know, apple tea, pumpkin pie type of fall. I would really like to read something in a different genre, and so I'm going to be reading the mystery anthology next. And stay tuned for that.
3 days later.
Okay, I am on a little bit of a time crunch right now, but let's talk just a little bit about The Fine Art of Murder, which I am currently, I don't know, I think about a quarter of the way into, maybe. It's a little hard to tell. This one is really hard to talk about cohesively because this is, as I think I previously mentioned, an anthology. And I have always been kind of iffy on anthologies. I think I've read 2 other ones, but this anthology is falling in the middle where there are a lot of stories that I feel like are not very good and that I don't really enjoy. And there are a lot that I find extremely valuable and shocking and entertaining. Um, I think that's to be expected because this is 18 stories, each written by a completely different person. So there is an element to this of you can tell when it is contrived and when things are being rushed and forced. Some of the time when you're reading a short story, I can tell when the writer of the short story probably should be writing just straight up novels. It happens a lot of the time where either you can tell that they basically, oh, it feels like you wrote the beginning or the end of a novel, but I don't feel anything about it because there's no emotional drive behind it, because it feels like the beginning or end of a book. It doesn't feel like a story on its own. Or the events that should be packed into a novella or a novel are kind of forced to take place very rapidly over the course of like 10 to 15 pages. And that, unfortunately, it just doesn't hit the right way when you're rushing something or when you're being too slow about something. And I can tell when that happens in this book. I think the first couple of stories were very much like, this is too much happening for one short story. And then the next couple were amazing, shocking. Gonna think about them forever. And then there were a few that were like, this definitely should have been a part of a book. It would be better if it was. This book, again, very hard to review. Also haven't finished it yet, so I'm going to talk about it more later on. But what I will say is that so far, my favorite story in the book has been this one where, because these are all murder stories, one where it is from the perspective of the person who commits the murder. And it's very short. It's one of the shortest ones, actually, that I've read so far. But the twist at the end of that short story had my jaw drop. And I have seen, as of now, I think like 4 or 5 crime shows. And they're all, formulaic. And most of these stories are very formulaic. Most crime stories are when you've seen that many. The fact that I was caught off guard by this when I know all of the formulas and I know all of the possible plot twists, it just was shocking. It was just deeply shocking. And I don't know if it would be shocking for everybody else. I think because I kind of had decided that the plot twist was going to be that the guy was the murderer, and that wasn't it. I think that was the thing that you were supposed to understand the whole time, which I did. And then the twist was a different thing. At the end, it was sort of an offshoot. But that story, and I'm going to have to check to remember, that story was called Ceilings, and it was written by N.W. Campbell, and it is the 4th story in the book. It is directly after Murder Confit by Marianne Halbert, which was probably my second favorite so far, and it That one was one of those that it was really good because what I think makes a really good short story is when it's just one moment. It's when you get the sense that, yeah, there is a larger story here, but you don't need to know it in order for this moment to matter. There is a larger story, but this moment is the part worth telling. This moment is what you need to know. And the rest of the story can be inferred by reading it, or it just simply doesn't matter. In the anthology that I really enjoyed, there was a story where it was just one conversation and you didn't know the context of it. You didn't know the larger story, but you weren't meant to. You were supposed to feel like kind of empty and lost. That was the tone of the story. In this one, it was very much like this moment is the moment worth telling. This moment is the thing that matters enough to write about, and the rest of it is just, background noise. And that one was very good. There was also kind of a plot twist in that one. It somehow managed to do a very Knives Out, Murder on the Orient Express-esque murder mystery in only I don't know, 10 pages or so, I think. There, and I really, truly forgot how short it was because I was like, I need to know who committed this murder, and I didn't expect it to be the person that it was. And then the end was very ambiguous and just really left me with a lot to think about. So those two have been my favorites so far. So yeah, I will see what the rest of the book is like and get back to you.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hi, I have officially finished The Fine Art of Murder, and it's still very hard to review because it is still an anthology, and it did not get any easier to create a cohesive thought process about this book as I went on, because every single story is written by a different person. I think there are 2 in the book, one towards the beginning and the very last one in the book, that are written by the same person. I hated both of those. I'm not going to go into it over much because it's the kind of thing that I just don't really want to give attention to. But it's basically, the whole point of this organization is that it's women writing the mysteries, writing the stories. There are very few men involved, but one of the men in this book, there's 3, just his stories were so much longer than anybody else's and longer than they needed to be. And quite obviously, misogynistic, fantasies. It was very odd. It was very just gross to read about. I'm not gonna say bad or evil. That's a bit strong, but it was gross. But I've already, I think, talked about the 2 that I liked so much. There was not really others that were at that level for me. I kind of feel like those should have been on opposite ends of the book, at least, to even it out, but they were back to back. And so then I kind of thought, oh, so it's gonna go uphill from here. No. There were several that were very water under the bridge. This is not the best thing I've ever read. It's not the worst thing I've ever read. It's just kind of there. There were a few, those 2 and some others that were what did I just read? What was that? I did not like that at all. And then there were a select amount that were, okay, that was good. And then there were 3 that I felt were wow, I enjoyed that a lot. I will say I got this at the same author signing event as the rest of the books, and this is the story that was written by the guy that sold the book to me, and this is his signature next to his story. This one was good. I did feel like there wasn't a lot of build to it, but that's fine. I mean, that's hard to do with a 10-page short story. I appreciated that he had a female protagonist in this short story, but he did not over-sexualize her the way that the other 2 male writers in this book did. There was no grossness in his, and I really appreciated that, because after reading the other 2 male writers in the book, I really was holding my breath but it was very respectful of everyone in the story, and it had a great twist at the end, which is that's how I like my short stories to be. I like the end to just suddenly pull the rug out from under me. And I'm not saying that all short stories should be that way, because that would get boring. I'm just saying that personally, to my taste, I really enjoy that happening. Overall, this was a great way of broadening my horizons, because I don't really think I've ever read like traditional mystery before. But it did bore me at several parts. There are stories in this book that I see myself rereading individually, so that's good. Definitely gonna hold on to this one. And I might try a different mystery book in the future to see if it compares, if it's the same for me, or if it's better. So now I'm moving on to the fourth book, which is Payton City, and I'm only like 5 chapters in, so I'm not going to really go into reviewing that too much. The only thing I will say is that I am so far enjoying that one the most out of the 4, but the protagonist is insufferable. I know, though, that it's deliberate. I think he's supposed to be. Like, the narrative is aware that he's insufferable and he's kind of a prick, and that is maybe, like, the point of him. So, I'm excited to see where that one takes me, and I will get back to you with more of a review on that.
One eternity later.
It is the very end of the very last day of the month, and I just today completed reading Payton City by K.L. Cook, which was the last book that I needed to read for this video, and reading those 4 books took so much longer than I intended. I wanted to read them all within the month of October. I just did not anticipate that I would be so down to the wire. And I think it's really that I was very busy for about the first half of the month. And then during the second half of the month, I was reading The Fine Art of Murder, which was not always interesting me, so I was dragging my feet on that one. But I have finally finished the last one, Payton City, and let me tell you, it was so worth it getting through the more slow, boring, or like just not to my personal taste parts of the other novels to get to this novel. I knew that I was going to have to binge read this book because of how long I had put it off. I did not anticipate that I probably would have done it anyway. I think that I would have read that book that quickly regardless. 4 years ago, when I did not have a YouTube channel and I didn't want to have a YouTube channel and I didn't know what reading goals were, I think I still would have read this book just as quickly, if not quicker. It was fantastic. I'm going to stop just saying random descriptors now and actually review the book. So I posted a review of this book that's semi-detailed to my Fable. I'm going to put what my Fable URL is on the screen because I can't really remember it right now. But I'm going to expound on that review a little bit here. Payton City is a fantasy dystopia novel. I do feel a little bit odd saying fantasy dystopia, but I've never heard anyone say dystopia fantasy, so I'm not going to put it that way, even though I feel like it's more dystopian than fantasy. It is about these people who are existing inside a futuristic society in a city which has a dome built over it in order to protect them from the toxic air that is outside. Basically, some sort of apocalyptic event happened outside of the city, and they don't want to go outside of it anymore. Over the course of the book, you pretty predictably discover that not everything is as it seems. People are a little bit more underhanded than you originally expect, and there's a lot of separate plot lines that end up coming together at the end pretty well. I think that some things are left very confusing because this is the first book of a series. For the most part, considering that you're not supposed to know everything yet, I think everything comes together very well. The entire middle of the book was my favorite part. I'm not going to reveal why because I feel that it's a bit of a spoiler, honestly, but it sort of departs from what the rest of the book is, and it like takes a break from that and does something else for a while, which is it's a very cool thing that it does, and it kind of refreshes you so you don't feel bored with the concept of the novel by the end. And that's all I am going to say about it. I would say my gripe with this book was that the writing style was a little wordy. It was very word salad. I hear the phrase word salad a lot now, and I don't really like it when people use that because I feel like it's overused and it's contrived, but I genuinely feel like I can't think of a better way of describing it. I just heard this quote from like Mark Twain, I think it was, the other day, which was, don't use a $5 word when a 50-cent word will do. I'm probably horrifically misquoting that because this is off the top of my head, but that's very much how I felt with this. A lot of very big, like, consult your dictionary type words being used, where I felt like a smaller word would have been fine. Like, instead of referring to people as the man and the woman, it was a lot of the male and the female. And it was like that with a lot of things. It was not just that, it was like the sentences were all very long. There were like 3 adjectives in front of every single noun. There was a lot of like unnecessary dialogue tags or like very excessive exposition. Not in the way, I didn't feel like I was having like the plot or the world explained to me. It was just that like something would happen and then the characters would reference it a couple of scenes later in like great detail, which is not really something that you need to do when the readers have actually read the thing that they're talking about. I would even say that even if the readers don't know what the characters are talking about, my personal preference is still not to have them talk about it that explicitly, because that can get into feeling like an info dump. But that is, I think, more of a personal thing, and that's not really what I'm talking about right now. I just do have to say, very wordy. A lot of unnecessary words, a lot of spots that I could tell were supposed to sound poetic. They just kind of sounded like a thesaurus was open next to the author while she was writing. That is literally really the only problem that I have with the book, however. And the main reason why I have this problem with the book is not because I'm like, oh, I couldn't understand it, it was too wordy. I do think that some people would have that issue, and that is valid of them. That's completely understandable. I think that's something we should consider when writing our books. Like, how accessible are these to people that might not be like as well read, as well educated as perhaps we are, or our target audiences. My issue with it was more that because all of the book was so full of these huge words and these long descriptive like build-ups to things that were not really that important in the grand scheme of things, all of the characters had the same voice. You know, this was a multi-perspective novel. There were 4 perspectives, wildly different people, and they all had like the same type of internal monologue. These are people that it would be like some of the characters are speaking polar opposite languages from each other. You know, these are people that are like from opposite social classes, from different sides of the world. I just felt like their internal monologues should have been different. The very wordy, overly descriptive monologue did make a little bit of sense for the main character, who was supposed to be kind of insufferable in the way that he thought. So for a while I thought that's what it was, but then when it switched perspectives to our main female character, it was still going on, and I was like, okay, well, she's like from the same exact background as him. She is a really different person. Like, they have very different views and like experiences, but like they are from the same background. So maybe it's still just like a cultural thing that people like think and talk like this. But then it switched to the other two point of views, and they were both from separate places that were also separate from the previous two characters. And they were the same, and that did kind of bother me. The characters also all kind of talked the same way. There was one of the four obviously talked very differently, but three of them talked very similarly, and for two it made sense, for the third it did not make sense. So that was my gripe with the novel. That was the only one. This was otherwise amazing. The plot was amazing. The world building was amazing. The way that the world was like introduced and described was fantastic. I never felt like, oh, you know, how you can kind of feel in some poorly written fantasy books or dystopian books where it's kind of like these characters were created and then the world was just built as a backdrop for them, or where you can tell that the world was built and then the characters were just like kind of forced into it, like they were created as separate entities almost and then jammed together, and as a result you either get an over or an under explaining of the world. However, this was not the case here. It really felt like these two things were absolutely meant to go together. These characters belong in this world. This world molded these characters. And I never, although I did get confused, as you do when reading fantasy, I never felt the kind of confused that you do when you're just not getting any information or when you're getting too much at once. It felt very natural how they talked about like how their technology worked and how their government worked, and it was just, it flowed out really nicely. There were actually two settings. Both settings were very unique, very well done, very fleshed out. They were immersive. I really felt like I was there with the characters, like watching things play out. I think maybe that was one thing that was actually good about the overly verbose writing style, is that you couldn't really miss any details because everything was just being like so vividly described. Again, I've already talked about the downsides to that, but that was one upside. The concept was very creative in a way that you don't see a lot anymore. This is a dead horse that so many people have beaten. I think we've just killed it a second time at this point. But you get this thing where fantasy is just the same thing over and over again now. It's very much like just people copying a copy of 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 something that was kind of good, what was actually inspired by something that was much better, which was inspired by mythology. And then it circles back around to, oh, here's a mythology retelling fantasy, and then people will copy that one regardless of how good it is, and it'll continue to be copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and it's just like never-ending echo chamber. I didn't get that with this. I didn't really, not at all. I felt like I saw some similarities between like fantasy and sci-fi and dystopia that I've consumed, but I did not feel like it was copied or ripped off. I just felt like there might have been influences there, or it might just be that I can vividly picture both of these worlds, and so I'm drawing a line between them in my mind. The world was like just similar enough to ours that there, like, you could find identification in it and like take away some commentary on like how our world works, but it was different enough that it didn't feel like they actually set it in a dystopian version of our world and then just slapped fantasy on for good measure, which of course this is a self-published novel. There's a lot of more creativity in independent novels because people are struggling to be able to publish ones that are unique, that have unique concepts. So you find unique concepts more in like less popular or independently published books now, and this really rings true for Payton City. I would say that if I was going to try to describe this book with like comparison titles, I think that the setting of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes combined with the atmosphere of Jurassic Park and the plot of Andor and you get this book. I'm sure that there are other things wrapped up in there. You know, there's a lot of elements that cannot be summed up to any of those things. But I feel like if you can easily describe the entirety of a book by comparing it to like 2 or 3 other books, it's just a copy. This book is not a copy. There are just similarities, and those are the similarities that I noticed. I happen to love all 3 of those things, so of course I really enjoyed this book. Although the 4 characters don't have very different voices from each other, they are obviously different from each other. And I valued that. I enjoyed how none of these 4 characters are really truly aware of each other. The ones that are not, like, they don't understand each other. It's clear that in this book, everybody has a wildly different story and motivation. No one is black and white here. Everyone is like dealing with their own thing in their own way, and none of them understand that about each other, which makes it very interesting, you know, to read about these characters just obviously not getting each other, knowing that that's kind of the point, I think, that the book is trying to make. The main point is that if these characters were allowed to communicate a little bit more, maybe some of the bad events in the novel and the bad events that I presume will come later on in the series would not happen. You know, if this dystopian society did not exist, or at the very least functioned differently, these characters would probably feel more comfortable being honest with each other and with the people around them, and things might be going smoother. People might be surviving a little bit better. It was so immersive. It was so good. I'm sad that it is over. I can't wait to read the second one, and I sincerely recommend it. It is the first book of Marks of Ithay. You can find lots of information about it at ithay.net, and Ithay is spelled Ithae. It is again by K.L. Cook. I want more people to read this. I know like no one watches this channel, but if you are watching this and you got to the end of this video, please check out this book and get more people to talk about it, please. Okay, well, that is the end of this video, finally. I have spent over a month recording this video, reading these books and talking about them, and I'm very happy to be finished, even though now I have to edit. So, I will see you on the other side of editing. Thank you so much for watching. Have a very wonderful day, and goodbye.